Go. Oh man. Okay. Let's see here. Okay, I think we're live here. Shalom, everyone. I'm Brother Doug with got Sister Marissa and Brother Yahusha, my mom, Sister Sharon. Let me do something here. I didn't realize I put live on Facebook. Let me just do a recording to the cloud so I'm able to upload this later. All right, guys. We're live right now. We're going to be doing a our normal Sabbath day study. I just want to apologize for a little bit of a tardiness here. We had really important stuff that we were talking about earlier today. So we're going to try to fit what we can in here. It might not be as long of a study as usual, but so just bear with me here. I'm going to try to get up my scriptures as quickly as I can. And we'll get going in 2 Kings chapter 7. All right, let me see here. Yeah, this Zoom update is going to take me a while to get used to. All right, let's see here. 2 Kings 7, as usual, Vulgate. All the way to the left, we got the Masoretic based version in the middle there, the ESV, and then we got my Septuagint all the way to the right. So I'll have that. Oh, since I'm not reading, actually, let me take that off. I remember what Brother Yahusha was trying to mention to me last time. So, um, Mom, whenever you're ready with chapter 7.
Chapter 7. Okay. Elisha said, "Hear the word of Yahuwah. This is what Yahuwah says about this time tomorrow. A seah of flour will sell for a shekel, and 2 seahs for barley of barley for a shekel at the gate of Samaria." The officer on whose arm the king was leaning said to the man of Yahuwah, "Look, even if Yahuwah should open the floodgates of the heavens, could this happen?" "You will see it with your own eyes," answered Elisha, "but you will not eat any of it." Now, there were 4 men with leprosy at the entrance of the city gate. They said to each other, "Why stay here until we die? If we say we'll go into the city, the famine is there and we will die. And if we stay here, we will die. So let's go over to the camp of the Arameans and surrender. If they spare us, we live. If they kill us, we die." At dusk, they got up and went to the camp of the Arameans. When they reached the edge of the camp, not a man was there.
This Mom, Aramaeans, I think is the way they pronounce it.
Arameans?
Okay. Yeah, like Aramaic. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
When they reached the edge of the camp, not a man was there, for Yahuwah had caused the Arameans to hear the sound of chariots and horses and a great army, so that they said to one another, "Look, the king of Yashrael has hired the Hittite and Egyptian kings to attack us." So they got up, fled in the dusk, and abandoned their tents and their horses and donkeys. They left the camp as it was and ran for their lives. The men who had leprosy reached the edge of the camp and entered one of the tents. They ate and drank and carried away silver, gold, and clothes and went off and hid them. They returned and entered another tent and took some things from it and hid them also. Then they said to each other, "We're not doing right. This is a day of good news, and we are keeping it to ourselves. If we wait until daylight, punishment will overtake us. Let's go at once and report this to the royal house." So they went and called out to the city gatekeepers and told them, "We went into the Aramaean camp, and not a man was there, not a sound of anyone, only tethered horses and donkeys, and the tents left just as they were." The gatekeepers shouted the news, and it was reported within the palace. The king got up in the night and said to his officers, "I will tell you what the Aramaeans have done to us. They know we are starving, so they have left the camp to hide in the countryside, thinking they will surely come out and then we will take them alive and get into the city. One of his officers answered, have some men take 5 of the horses that are left in the city. Their plight will be like that of the Israelites left here. Yes, they will only be like all these Israelites who are doomed. So let us send them to find out what happened. So they selected 2 chariots with their horses, and the king sent them after the Aramean army. He commanded the drivers, go and find out what has happened. They followed them as far as Jordan, and they found the whole road strewn with the clothing and equipment the Iranians had thrown away in their headlong flight. So the messengers returned and reported to the king. Then the people went out and plundered the camp of the Arameans. So a seah of flour sold for a shekel, and 2 seahs of barley sold for a shekel, as Yahuwah had said. Now the king had put the officer on whose arm he leaned in charge of the gate, and the people trampled him in the gateway, and he died, just as the man of Elua had foretold when the king came down to his house. It happened as the man of Elua had said to the king. About this time tomorrow, a seah of flour will sell for a shekel, and 2 seahs of barley for a shekel at the gate of Samaria. The officer had said to the man of Elua, look, even if Yahuwah should open the floodgates of the heavens, could this happen? The man of Elua had replied, you will see it with your own eyes, but you will not eat any of it. And that is exactly what happened to him, for the people trampled him in the gateway, and he died.
Hmm. All right. All right. So anyone got anything to add here? I'm just kind of scrolling up here. So we have the Samaritans. Seems like it's mentioning, or at least Samaria is being mentioned.
Famine.
Shekels of barley for
Yeah, I'm just wondering why the punishment for doubt is so intense. Like you have this man that says, let me see, the officer on whose hand the king rested answered Elisha and said, behold, if Yahweh would make floodgates in Shamim, might this thing be? And because he doubted, like gets trampled over by he gets trampled over. Just wondering why it's so intense.
Yeah.
Not too sure. Wondering what this means here. They hired Hittite and Egyptian kings to attack us. Interesting. I wonder why they would think that. Why did the Arameans think that? Yeah, I think doubt a lot of the times, I think it's taken so seriously by Yahuwah maybe because like all the stuff he did for them, like
Yeah.
you see like in the New Testament, it's not as big of a sin, I guess, because the especially with what was it, Doubting Thomas?
Yeah.
He wasn't there to see those Israelites were not there to see Yahuwah's power. Those Israelites were not there to see what Yahuwah could do for them. So, I think a lot of Yahusha showing mercy in Brit Hadasha was more or less because of different circumstances, possibly, rather than, doubt itself has such a hefty
Mhm.
punishment. It might be just the fact that a lot of these guys knew about Yahuwah's power, knew that they should have trust in Yahuwah and not fear of man, and were raised to know who Yahuwah is, and they still doubted Yahuwah, knowing his miracles, knowing about Yahuwah's great power, and maybe that's a different level of doubt. That's maybe that's why, I don't know.
Hmm.
I've heard that being preached before, and I kind of agree with it to an extent, because I don't think we know Yahuwah on the level that Masha knew Yahuwah, on the level Aaron did,
Mhm.
on the level that first Israelite generation saw everything he did in Egypt.
Right.
Mhm.
And Yahuwah's like, you saw what I did. Why are you doubting me? And he constantly says that through the Tanakh. And then he comes as
Yeah.
Yahusha the Brit, and you see a lot more mercy. And sometimes this is where the Gnostics go wrong. We were kind of talking about the Gnostics today off the record. This is where the Gnostics go wrong and the Marcionites go wrong and think, well, Yahusha is the one I want to worship because he's super merciful and he's this.
Mhm.
And Yahuwah's a big old meanie. Why would I want to worship him? This is their mindset because they don't understand it's the same person, but in different circumstances. And showing Thomas that extra mercy wasn't like, this is how it always is going to be. But it's like, this guy, Yahusha came to him where he was at. A lot of those apostles really weren't raised. I mean, probably some of them were raised with knowledge of the scriptures, but I think a lot of them were just common men that he picked up that
Mhm.
really were tradesmen. They didn't really know, they weren't scholars in the word. And so it's kind of different situations between the two. But I noticed the whole big old Marcionite theology, though these are the type of topics they'll go into and paint Yahuwah in a bad light, and how Marcion tries to portray Yahuwah as this demiurge,
Mhm.
and how a lot of people have that psychological mentality today. They look at the Old Testament like, oh my goodness, so much more severe, not realizing there could be underlining issues why Yahuwah was more so severe in certain instances.
They don't read the whole story. They don't see how many years he warned them, and how he was merciful. The whole problem is people pick out
Mhm.
the points of
Yeah,
wrath,
yeah,
when the
yeah.
angel of Yahuwah or the word of
Mhm.
Yahuwah walks in and slays 80,000 people.
Mhm.
They just look at those things. They don't look at all the situation and how many years of warning that he gave them in these situations.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, it's different. It's different people in different situations. It's
Mhm.
different, there's overall Yahuwah shows a lot more mercy in the Brit Hadashah. Not that there's not mercy in the Tanakh,
Right.
but it's a new covenant in a more merciful type of administration, where in the Levitical priesthood you had, you know there was a lot of times where severity was being used, and Yahusha's saying, like, listen, show mercy. He's not saying you got to show mercy every time
Mhm.
when someone's being punished, but this is an option. Mercy is an option. So I think sometimes is we wanted all mercy, no wrath. We're taught
Yeah.
in the church.
Yeah.
And so we get this weird duality paradigm. And the thing is, Yahuwah has mercy and wrath. And it's not dualistic. It's the fact that just like he makes us, we're made in his image, especially us men are made in Yahuwah's image. We have the same characteristics. There's times where we show mercy, and there's other times we feel like wrath is necessary. it's the same concept when you raise your children. Sometimes you got to punish them. You don't want to, but sometimes you got to punish them because the message is not getting through. You keep letting them, get a little slap on the wrist and not really punishing them, and they're taking advantage of it. So sometimes, there's always that dichotomy of when do you use your wrath, when do you use mercy, type of thing. And so that's why I say we also have to look at the circumstances when people are being punished harshly for doubt, for lack of faith, quote unquote. There's always something usually attached to it. Like, for example, right, Numbers 13, we could use to this point too. Numbers 13 was a really harsh punishment. Yahuwah decided not to go with them to war because they lacked faith. So all of them died. They said, oh, now we'll go. We believe in Yahuwah now. And because Yahuwah didn't tell them to go into war after the bad report was given, many of those Israelites were killed by the giants, and Yahuwah allowed it. So, I think also it really depends on what is, like what type of lack of belief you're dealing with. If you're dealing with just like, giving into fear of man, and seeing Yahuwah's miracles and fearing them, I think is on a whole nother type of level of doubt. Like Yahuwah's not even like demanding that you have like pure blind faith at that point. He showed you what, Yahuwah showed you that he's the true Elohim. These other gods of Egypt were nothing. And now you're going into this land, the promised land, right? And they didn't even have any trust in him at all. Right after only a couple generations removed, after he showed them, who is the Elohim of Elohim. And so you can kind of see why sometimes Yahuwah was harsh on people for their lack of faith, because it wasn't just a little doubt. It was like they completely didn't believe in him, even after he just showed them, who he is, the great I am. Go ahead, bro.
I was just looking at them where they were saying, you were saying, hold on, let me go back to it. Were you asking why they thought that the kings of the Hittites and the kings of the Mitzrites would have been hired against them?
Yeah, I was a little confused by that. Just trying to see why. There's nothing mentioning them earlier on.
Because I know later on, I know at least at some places in Scripture they seem to, Israel seems to team up with Egypt, or Egypt seems to come to the help of Israel. So I wonder if that happened before or if that's later on in Scripture. Because if it's happened before, then it could possibly make sense. So hey, like they teamed up with Egypt before.
Yeah.
Oh, this is definitely way after Solomon, right?
Yeah, way after Solomon.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm remembering from the Septuagint, and I think First Kings or somewhere, Chronicles, where it mentions that Yahuwah used the Pharaoh to wipe out the giants. I think that's the only time that you see Egypt really on their side early on. Now later on, when Judah rebels against Yahuwah, they flee back to Egypt on their own. And so that, I think Nico or the guy before him is the one Yahuwah calls, you great dragon in the waters. And Yahuwah's pronouncing judgment on this Pharaoh for hiding his people from him and saying, your Egypt is not going to be your security. So there's only 2 times I remember in Scripture Egypt ever helping Israel. I think it would have been either when Yahuwah is about to, cast them out of the land for the captivity, and during Solomon's time, I think there's a instance where Yahuwah uses the Pharaoh to kill some Nephilim. That's the only 2 times I remember them being in league with Mitzrayim. Other than that, I don't know where the Arameans would get that idea from, other than those two times. So it's possibly in Solomon's day that there was some type of. Oh, why didn't I think of this? Supposedly, right, Mom? Isn't there an oral tradition that supposedly Solomon married that Egyptian daughter
Yeah.
so that they would have a what is it
An
called?
alliance,
An
like
alliance. So maybe it's the
yeah.
days of Solomon. That's what I would guess. Because supposedly he married that Egyptian woman
Yeah.
to not to avoid war, basically.
Uh-huh.
So he took that Egyptian wife so they would have a alliance or a peace between them two. So maybe these Arameans were at war with Israel around that time, and they would have remembered
Could be.
the Egyptian kings, helping out King Solomon. I don't know. Other than that, especially the Hittites, I don't know where they would get that idea. That's very strange.
Well, he did marry them to the Hittites as well.
Yeah, okay. So that maybe it's from Solomon's day. Maybe
Mhm.
that's a little historical
Could
thing
be. Could
that
be.
we don't know about. Um, but yeah, that would be my guess. Um, Other than that, I think this chapter is pretty self-explanatory here. You have the gates of Samaria is mentioned a bunch of times.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm guessing this is dealing with the northern house a lot.
With
Um,
with Syria, was Syria always the same as Aram, or did did a was it taken over and the Syrians and the Arameans became one people?
Possibly they got taken over at one point. Um,
I think the Aramaic Aram, that's one of the sons of Shem.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
interesting that you have Shemites attacking Shemites.
According to Wikipedia, now I don't know if this is true or not, but they're identifying Syria as Assyria, which again, I mean that's assuming that they're correct. It would definitely not always be the same thing as Aramea. If Assyria is Syria, that would definitely prove that they weren't always that they got taken over at some point because Assyria was actually controlled by the Babylonians at one point. So if this is the case, then you would definitely have.
Where is it
Uh,
saying that?
Let me see here. So the Arameans, in the Near Ancient East, first documented historical sources from the late 12th century BC, homeland as the land of Aram. So I guess that's where they're getting identified with Aramea, is the land of Aram. At the beginning of the first millennium BC, a number of Aramean ruled cities were established throughout the Near Ancient East. Most notable was Damascus, Aram and Damascus. Now, this is what I was talking about, the Neo Assyrian Empire. So if you go down here, the Neo Assyrian Empire would have been, I think, around like Nimrod's time. During the 8th century BC, local Aramean city states were gradually conquered by the Neo Assyrian Empire. So Assyria took over Aramea. Population of displacement, yada, 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 also affected Arameans, many of whom were resettled by Assyrian authorities. So the only way Aram and Syria would have always been the same place is if the Assyrians were not Syrians.
Well,
That's
when you look up Syria on Wikipedia, it doesn't
okay.
equate it to Assyria. It
Okay.
just says Syria is home to diverse ethnic and religious groups, including Arabs, Kurds, Turkmens, Assyrians, Circassians, Armenians. Um, but I'm not seeing it, although I'm not. Uh, I don't think it
Okay.
equates it actually to Assyria, but that Assyrians live in Syria.
Yeah. Yeah, so it seems like that Aramean and Syria were always the same land, but eventually, according to Wikipedia here, that the Babylonians and the Neo-Assyrian Babylonian Empire would have took them over at some point. So you would have had Cushites and Assyrians eventually take it over, that live there now. So you would probably have um, whatever the Babylonian ethnicity is today, which I'm assuming a lot of them are Cushite. Um, they're later Akkadian, so the Akkadian Empire settled there as well. In they're talking about 539 to 330 BCE, so that's 5th century to 3rd century.
We're saying 3500 BC, or after 3500 BC, that they were trading with the Mesopotamians. They were trading with Sumer, Assyria, Acadia.
Yeah, it gets very funny because I wonder what timeline they're going on with the 3500 BC, because that seems very early for them to be existing. That would be almost like 4th century BC. That seems very, I don't know, very unlikely. I wonder when does, hold on, let me see something. I know this is not a perfect chart, but let me see something here. Bible Hub, Bible timeline. I just want to see if that's even realistic to have the Tower of Babel. Like, they would have had to be formed after the Tower of Babel, I would assume. Um, the Akkadians and all that. Let me just see here. Yeah, the 3500 BC, I think it's very inaccurate, that date. That they're, I wonder what timeline they're going by, because you would have had Adam to Noah somewhere around 3rd to 4th century. I don't think, yeah, I think they're probably evolutionists. Whatever article you're reading, they're probably evolutionists. They probably believe the world is like millions of years old.
This
So
is
that's probably where they're getting.
coming from Wikipedia. It's also showing that that apparently this area that's known as Aram or Aramea was actually, the Syrians would have been there before the Arameans.
Hmm.
That it eventually
That's,
became known as Aram, but it was known as Syria before it was known as Aram.
yeah, that doesn't make any sense, because then Wikipedia is contradicting itself. Because I'm looking at the Aramaeans article. That doesn't make any sense. There is saying that the Aramaean ruled cities. Um, According to this, it's saying that they were never one people. The Aramaeans, it says they were never a single nation or group. Rather, Aram was a region where local centers spread throughout the Levant. That makes it almost impossible to establish a coherent ethnic category of Aramaean based on extra linguistic identity markers such as material culture, religion, lifestyle. During the 8th century BC, 800 BC, about, local Aramean cities were gradually conquered by the Neo-Assyrian Empire. So I wonder where that other article you're looking at would claim the original inhabitants of that land, how far it goes back then, because if they're getting conquered by 800 BC by the Assyrians, that's very weird. That's very strange. As far as I know, the Aramaeans was like a general term for like people of Aram. So people of that Mesopotamian like you know geographical area. So like basically
But
Aram would,
wouldn't the people of Aram be the people descended from Aram? Because we know that,
yeah.
like, even with it being a geographical location, at the same time we know that the geographical locations were named after people.
Yeah.
Like, you have Mitzrayim named after Mitzrayim. So I would have, I'm just assuming that Aram would have been named after Aram. one of the children of Sham.
Mhm.
It'd be kind of weird to have that place without it coming from him.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm trying to find some like really good historical linking back to the original people of Aram. Um, from what I remember, though, it's similar to Mesopotamia. It's not much different. It's in that area. It's in that. So you would have. I wonder if the original Aramaeans were like a mixture of like some of them might have been Shemites, some of them might have been Cushites, some of them might have, depending on where like what ethnic groups went through that area, because you even have Jacob being referenced as Aramaean or Assyrian. Um, and there's even places in the Septuagint where it talks about that Jacob left the land of Mesopotamia in the LXX, it will say. So there, I think it's hard to, like the Wikipedia article is saying, it's hard to pinpoint one ethnic group as Aramaeans because it seems like that was such a big region that like Mesopotamia that you would have had multiple ethnic groups physically there. So I think that's why they're saying that is like it's hard to pinpoint who the now as far as the Assyrians go, we can go all the way back to Genesis 10. That the Assyrians are very easy to track. Ashur, the guy of Seth's lineage, was really the father of the Assyrians, and then Nimrod came around, the Babylonians took them over, and all that. But the problem here is who would have fathered. I'm assuming the guy Aram, because there was a guy named Aram in the Bible. He probably would have fathered the original Arameans. And yeah, here we go. So there's Shemites. Aram is the son of Shem, according to the table of nations in Genesis 10, and the father of Uz. Interesting. Uz. That's interesting. Isn't Uz where Edom goes?
No, I think that's what that's that
Uh,
the second Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle movies. The Secret of Ooze.
yeah, so Aram, the person Aram though, it's saying is a descendant of Shem. So they would have been related to the Israelites if this is the case. You would have had some type of linking to Abraham and all that. So they might not be direct brothers with the Israelites, but they would have been probably cousins, I'm guessing, or
I
something. So
don't think they would have gone to Abraham. They would have gone to Sham, but
okay,
Abraham is like definitely
yeah,
farther down the line.
yeah, yeah,
Abraham would have come from who would he come from?
yeah. So
Arphaxad, I think.
yeah, according to scripture, this is the father of the Arameans, though. So this would be the ancient ancestor of them. So they originated as purely Shemite. I'm assuming when the Babylonians and Assyrians took them over, they intermarried with them. So they could be a mixture now, modern day. The Assyrians that are now in Aram or Syria, they could be a mixture. They could almost be like the Samaritans, practically. They're almost like the Samaritans, where you had the Assyrians came in from the Assyrian captivity. Supposedly, this is the claim that when the northern house went away, some Assyrians settled in their place in the land, and eventually you had northern house Israelites intermarrying with the Assyrians. So it's almost similar to that. It seems like eventually in modern day, what you have in Syria now is like people that are part Assyrian, part Shemite, you know, whatever else
Well,
might be over there.
I think the Assyrians um are Shemite too, because
Mm-hmm.
don't they come from Ashur?
The originals did, yeah.
Right.
They the originals did, but I think when Babylon took over and Nimrod took over, you might have had some Cushite blood in there, and all that. So we don't know exactly after Nimrod took over what it would have been over there. I'm assuming you have Babylonians over there once he goes into Assyria, like Genesis 10 says. You would have a mixing. So the Assyrians themselves are probably mixed. They're probably Cush and Shem mixed together alone. And then you have them taking over, according to Wikipedia here, they took over the inhabitants, the original inhabitants of Aramea got took over by the Assyrians at some point. So then they're taking over Syria and they're intermingling, with the Syrians. So you would have a mishmash of an ethnicity there in the land today. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's like really hard to, I think that's why the article says it's impossible to figure out exactly what ethnicity they all are because it's a general region. So yeah, I guess I could see why it's hard to pinpoint it because when you got that much mixing, it's kind of hard. Go ahead, Sister Marissa.
Didn't Yahushua speak Aramaic?
Yes, I think there's two opinions out there. Either they spoke primarily either Aramaic or Greek around his time in the land. There's usually the two opinions that most people put forth is either, especially people that are pro Peshitta will say he spoke Aramaic all the time, and they'll say this is how we know the New Testament was originally written in Aramaic. I don't know if there's proof that for either one. I think the assumption would be for the Greek opinion would be because they're quoting from the Septuagint all the time. So there's like two different opinions. As far as fact, I can't exactly say one way or another that was 100% Aramaic or 100% Greek. I think there might have been a mixture of that. I definitely think they were. It seems like there's proof that the original Paleo Hebrew though was definitely not. It was not spoke that much anymore. It was becoming like a lost language at that time
But
because
what did Abraham speak? They say he was a Chaldean, right?
he spoke on Paleo. Because when you look at the other regions around that area, they kind of copied the Paleo. The Phoenicians, even of Tyre, they have their own version of the Paleo. Like I'll
So
show you.
Yahushua didn't speak Hebrew?
He would have known Hebrew, but the people that he's talking to in his missions, they're not going to know Hebrew. So most likely he was speaking Greek or Aramaic when he was preaching the good news. Because no one's going to really, you already had in Ezra's time. You had to have like a meturgeon, literally paraphrasing what was read from the scrolls. So you already had in Ezra's time when they came back from the Babylonian captivity, the majority of the people did not know Hebrew anymore. You had like Ezra, Daniel, and maybe Nehemiah might have known, like the head guys, the priests and all that might have known Hebrew, but it was like very uncommon anymore they would use it as a religious language, but they would never in common language they would have to speak to a lot of these people. When they got Hellenized, they started speaking a lot of Greek, they started speaking a lot of Aramaic, so that those were like the two languages that were really spoke around that time. Go ahead, Brother Yahusha.
Oh, no, never mind.
Yeah, I'm just speaking on what I know from research and what others have researched about that time period. It seems like Paleo Hebrew, the original Paleo Hebrew, was very lost at that time. It was really used as a liturgical language, like in service and all that, in the synagogue and all that. But as far as trying to preach to a Greek person is not going to know the original Hebrew. If you're trying to preach to any type of Gentile that's in the land, you would have to know their language. And you see that with Paul. Paul knew, I think, what was it, Mom? He knew Latin. There's somewhere in the Brit Hadashah.
No, Latin, yes.
Because he was Roman.
Mm-hmm.
He was a Roman citizen, so he would have had to know Latin. So they definitely were speaking in other languages other than Hebrew. Not saying that they never did speak in Hebrew, but it wasn't common. It wasn't the common language anymore. Even those that are pro Peshitta admit this, that are, that believe Aramaic was majorly spoken, not much Greek. They'll admit that Hebrew in general, both sides of the argument, they admit that Hebrew was not spoken that much anymore.
Mm-hmm.
The latest text you have really in Paleo Hebrew, or some version of it, is the Samaritan Pentateuch, and that only dates back to about 100 AD. I think was really that's or not 100 AD. I'm sorry, 100 BC. So the last time Paleo Hebrew was really used in a manuscript even was like 100 years before Messiah. So
Mm-hmm.
around the Messiah's time, they weren't really using Paleo Hebrew as a common language anymore. The assumption was they were using it in the synagogue, in the services. Someone's reading from a scroll. That's a whole different story. But even with that, you had people. Let me actually bring you to the scripture I'm talking about here in Ezra and Nehemiah. I think it's where,
Because even in Daniel's time, that there was
yeah,
Aramaic in
Nehemiah, um, Ezra expounds on the scripture so they can understand. And by the way, those that are pro Targums will point to this and they'll say, this was probably the origin orally of the Targums. So this is the claim. I'm not saying it's true. I'm saying this is the claim. So let me see if I can get this real quick. Yeah. Okay, Ezra 7:10. Let's see here. I think this is the right verse I'm looking for. But according to Jewish people and like the Ammonite Jews, they would point to this as the origin of the Aramaic Targums, like the first ever Targums, that possibly Ezra would have been orally the first Targumic guy. Let's see here. For Ezra had his heart set to study the law of Yahuwah and to do it and teach his statutes and rules in Yashrael, Ezra 7:10, to consider Ezra the priest. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to go to where it starts talking about. He explained it. He got on the podium and explained the Torah to them for them to understand. I don't care what the rabbis have to say. I'm not worried about that. What I'm more worried about is where is the scripture that they go to. I know there's a certain scripture. I'm trying to remember. Oh, here we go. Nehemiah 8. So it's in Nehemiah. Nehemiah 8, 5-10. And Ezra opened the book in sight of all the people, for he was standing above the people, above all the people. He was like on a podium. When he opened it, all the people stood up. And Ezra baruched Yahuwah, the great Elohim, and all the people answered, so be it, so be it. With lifting their hands, they bowed their heads and worshipped Yahuwah with their faces to the ground. And Yahusha, so then it goes to talk about all the priests that are there and all that. Okay. So they read in the book of the law of Elohim distinctly and gave the sense, meaning the understanding, and caused them to understand the reading. So many pro-Targum people will point to like this in Nehemiah 8:8 was the origin of orally the Targums, and that the Aramaic Targums went to the origin of them would have been around Nehemiah's time and Ezra's time, orally, not physically written down, but orally. They would have what they be a professional interpreter of the law. As the law is being read, they're explaining to them in their native tongue of Aramaic, hey, this is, what this means. This is what that means. Because the people lost the knowledge of the Paleo Hebrew from the captivity. And we can also go to the book of Daniel to show this. Daniel also has this, where Daniel was the only one able to read the description. Mind you, you got tons of Judeans in the land of Babylon that couldn't read what Yahuwah's finger wrote. So that language barrier, they can't understand it. Only Daniel can
Mhm.
in Daniel chapter 5. So see here, Daniel 5 verse 8. All the king's wise men came in, but they could not read the writing or tell the king what it meant. Now, some people will say that's just talking about his wise men, but you also don't have any of the Aubrey people, standing up saying we can read it. So you also don't have any of the Aubrey people that are in captivity there saying, we can read the inscription. They have to go to Daniel. Out of all the Judeans in captivity, they have to go to him. Go ahead, brother.
I guess my question would be then, but were there any Aubrey people actually in the presence of the king? And would he have even thought to have gone to ask the Aubrey people? Or I think the only reason he goes to Daniel is because I think someone
His
mentioned him, right?
Yeah, his mother, Belshazzar's mother. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because supposedly his mother somehow orally kept the tradition of Nebuchadnezzar and Daniel being under Nebuchadnezzar and Daniel, being giving all these types of visions
Mhm.
that he was someone in high regard. So they went to Daniel, and I still think though it's valid though that you have him as the only one that could read the inscription.
But Brother
And
Doug, doesn't it say that they they sought out a Hebrew boy?
yeah, yeah. Well,
So
his mother knew that he was a Judean because of his grandfather was Nebuchadnezzar, so she knew about him. I think this verse goes in saying that your was it your ancestor, or your grandfather Nebuchadnezzar knew this boy.
Yeah.
And it talks about how that Daniel was called in because of Belshazzar's mother.
Mhm.
And she was the one to really tell him, like, listen, your grandfather knew this boy from the Yahudim. Um, let me see here. So it says here, I think it starts. Let me see here. It should start in verse Daniel 5. Or maybe it's the end of 4, actually. Let's see here. Where does it say? No, I guess not. That's weird. Because it should be in should be. I'm gonna find that verse where it talks about okay, Belshazzar made a great feast, they drank wine. The king's countenance changed, verse 6. His thoughts troubled him, so that the joints of his hips were loosened, his knees knocked against each other. The king cried, bring out all the astrologers, yada, yada, yada. Now all the king's wise men came, but they could not read the writing and make known to the king his interpretation. Then King Belshazzar was greatly troubled, his countenance changed, and his masters were astonished. And the king, oh, my bad, the queen, so it's actually his wife. My bad, not his mother, his wife. The queen, because of the words of the king, and his masters came to the banquet hall, the queen saying, O king, live forever. Do not let your thoughts trouble you, nor let your countenance change. There is a man in your kingdom in whom the spirit of the Kadash Alahim, in the days of your father, light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of, they believe in multiple gods, like the wisdom of the gods were found in him. And King Nebuchadnezzar, your father, now they have a little note for father here that it does not mean like literal father. It can mean ancestor. It can mean some people have even historically pinpointed that it was his grandfather, but
Mhm.
that's neither here nor there. But so gave him esteem and honor. He gave him all nations and tongues. Tremble and feared before him. Whoever he willed, he executed. Whom he willed, kept alive. Whoever he willed, he set up. Whoever he willed, he put down. So she is basically explaining to her husband Belshazzar, like, listen, he has the most high spirit in him. Go to him and he'll be able to figure out this riddle. to me though, what's interesting is this inscription. It's if the Yahudim were there, it seems like they weren't able to figure it out. If they weren't there, that could be a possible way out of it. To me, it's just really interesting that this is one of the last times you really see a hint to someone knowing the Paleo Hebrew language, possibly, since Yahuwah's finger wrote it. So uh, um, that's personally what I believe it's hinting to, is that Daniel would have been one of the very few people that would have still known the language that Yahuwah gave to, his people. And supposedly historically during this time here, they come back from Babylon in Ezra's time and Nehemiah's time, and none of them know Hebrew anymore. Like they actually need someone to expound the scriptures to them to explain what it's saying. So it seems like they're all speaking a different language, it would seem. Which, that's kind of the opinion of many people that have researched into the captivity and what happened there. It seems like post-Babylonian captivity, they took traditions and all of that. They also took the language of the land at that time back with them. And they eventually made a modern version of that language, which they called the modern Bach and all that. So supposedly the modern Hebrew came from the Aramaic, that it's basically similar to a modern Aramaic, if I'm not mistaken. So that's pretty much historically what has been claimed. Now, oh, go ahead, brother. I didn't realize your hand was still up. My bad.
Oh no, old hand.
Yeah, so it's true what brother Yahusha said, though. Technically, he doesn't literally say it. I'm kind of inferring that since none of the Hebrew people really stood up if they were in his presence, that it seems like this was a lost language that really, wasn't being used in captivity too much. And it seems like historically they didn't really use it after that fact either. It seems like Ezra probably knew it, Nehemiah knew it possibly, but it seems like the common people really stopped it. You fast forward 200 years later, right? After Nehemiah's time, you have the Septuagint. So now everyone's reading from a Greek manuscript, right? They're reading from a Greek Tanakh around 300 BC. That's 200 years after Nehemiah and all that. So you already have a gap of 200 years where they already stopped really using Paleo, probably around the time of Nehemiah. And then now, fast forward 200 years later, you're in the Greek Hellenistic time period. Many scholars point to that time period, 300 BC, as a time period of really they actually chose to stop using Hebrew because they got so Hellenized. And I mean, that's just a fact of history, whether you like it or not. That's a fact. So, between that and the Septuagint being written, and if you really think about it too, right, the Septuagint wasn't just written for the Greeks. It was written for Greek-speaking Judeans in Egypt, in Alexandria, Egypt. So you also have to understand too, historically, what happened to the Yahudim around 3rd century BC. About that, when Alexandrian Empire came in, they were somehow relocated in Egypt. I don't know why. I don't think there's much about it telling us why from 600 BC to 300, from 400, 200 BC, somehow at some point they went back into Egypt and they actually lived in Egypt. You had Alexandrian Judeans in Egypt. So the Septuagint wasn't just written for Greek people. It was written so that you had Yahudim in Egypt that could read the scriptures. So you also have to realize that too. So, oh yeah, my bad. Yeah, no, it's okay, bro. I think it's important to explain this though, because this shows kind of the history of the manuscripts, why there was a need for a Septuagint, why there might have been a need for the Targums as well. If these Jewish rabbis are correct about Nehemiah 8:8 being the origin of the Targums, then you can see why. If they stop speaking Hebrew, okay, it makes sense now to make an Aramaic oral translation first. Now, while I'm saying oral, I'm being specific about oral. Technically, they didn't write down the Targums until the first century, until like 100 AD. They were not writing down Targums. They were orally speaking it in the synagogue. So it became a oral, paraphrased version of the scrolls. When the scrolls were being read, they were like, okay, this means that, speaking to the people in Aramaic. So you can do your own research on tons of links I can give you guys for that, proving that historically that was happening at some point between the second to first century BC to all the way to the early synagogue periods of like 300 400 AD. That gap of time, the Targum started becoming very popular in the rabbinical section of the Judeans. They started really clinging to those, especially after 100 AD. They stopped using the Septuagint because the Septuagint was being used to convert people to Yahusha. The disciples were using the Septuagint, preaching in Greek to people in the Gentiles and saying, hey, listen, this is Yahusha. This is him right there in the Septuagint. So they gradually started getting away from the Septuagint. They started going to their, Aramaic translations later on. So anyway, sorry for that whole history lesson, but I thought it was pertinent to talk about that because it'll explain more about, the why there was a need for Aramaic language, why there was a need for a Greek language. And so anyway, so again, that was Nehemiah 8:8 I referenced about he made them understand. It talks about him expounding the law to make them understand. And that's not my opinion. That's the opinion of, a lot of these like pro Targum Jewish people today. That's what they believe. So I'm just stating what they believe. I'm not saying that that's a fact. So anyway, so where are we at? Chapter 8, right? All right, let's pick a new reader. I know Sister Marissa volunteered. Oh, brother, did you have a hand up, or I think that was a thumbs up? Okay. Sister Marissa, if you would like to read chapter 8 for us, I would really appreciate it.
Okay, can you put it up on the screen so I can read it?
Yeah, sure. Sure. Let me just focus on one translation here. All right, here. Okay, there we go. All right.
Okay. And Elisai spoke to the women whose son he had restored to life, saying, arise and go thou in thy house, and sojourn wherever thou mayest sojourn. For Yahuwah has called for a famine upon the land. Indeed, it has come upon the land for 7 years. And the woman arose and did according to the word of Elisaiah, both she and her house, and they sojourned in the land of the Philistines 7 years. And it came to pass after the expiration of the 7 years that the woman returned out of the land of the Philistines to the city and came to cry to the king for her house and for her lands. And the king spoke to Gehazi, the servant of Elisai, the man of Yahuwah, saying, tell me, I pray thee, all the great things which Elisai has done. And it came to pass, as he was telling the king how he had restored to life the dead son, behold, the woman whose son Elisai restored to life came crying to the king for her house and for her lands. And Gehazi said, my master, O king, this is the woman, and this is her son, whom Elisai restored to life. And the king asked the woman, and she told him. And the king appointed her an eunuch, saying, restore all that was hers and all the fruits of her field from the day that she left the land until now. And Elisai came to Damascus, and the king of Syria, the son of Adar, was ill. And they brought him word, saying, the man of Yahuwah is come hither. And the king said to Azael, take in thine hand a present, and go to meet the man of Yahuwah, and inquire of Yahuwah by him, saying, shall I recover of this my disease? And Azael went to him went to meet him, and he took a present in his hand and all the good things of Damascus, 40 camels' loads, and came and stood before him, and said to Elisai, Thy son, the son of Adar, the king of Syria, has sent me to thee to inquire, saying, Shall I recover of this my disease? And Elisai said, Go away, go, say, thou shalt certainly live. Yet Yahuwah has shewed me that thou shalt surely die. And he stood before him and fixed his countenance till he was ashamed, and the man of Yahuwah wept.
Let's see. Is that the end? Okay, I'm just trying to see how I got lost here.
I was at verse 11.
Yeah.
No, I don't know.
Is that
I already
the,
got lost.
oh, okay. And
Okay.
Azael said, Why does my master weep? And he said, Because I know all the evil that thou wilt to do the children of Israel. Thou wilt utterly destroy their strongholds with fire, and thou wilt slay their choice men with sword, and thou wilt dash their infants against the ground, and their women with child thou wilt rip up. And Azael said, who is thy servant, a dog, that he shall do this? And Elisai said, The master has shown me thee ruling over Syria. And he departed from Elisai and went into his master. And he said to him, What said Elisai to thee? And he said to me, Thou shalt surely live. And it came to pass on the next day that he took a thick cloth and dipped it in water and put it on his face, and he died. And Azael reigned in his stead. In the 5th year of Joram, son of Achab, king of Israel, and while Josaphat was king of Judah, Joram, the son of Josaphat, king of Judah, began to reign. 32 years old was he when he began to reign, and he reigned 8 years in Jerusalem. And he walked in the way of the kings of Israel, as did the house of Achab, for the daughter of Ahab was his wife. And he did that which was evil in the sight of Yahuwah. But Yahuwah would not destroy Judah for David his servant's sake, as he said he would give a light to him and to his sons continually. In his days, Edom revolted from under the hand of Judah, and they made a king over themselves. And Joram went up to Seir, and all the chariots that were with him. And it came to pass, after he had arisen, that he smote Edom, who compassed him about. And the captains of the chariots and the people fled to their tents. Yet Edom revolted from under the hand of Judah till this day. Then Lobnah revolted at that time. And the rest of the acts of Joram and all that he did, behold, are not these written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Judah? So Joram slept with his fathers and was buried with his fathers in the city of his father David. And Ocasias his son reigned in his stead. In the 12th year of Joram, son of Ahab, king of Israel, Ocasias, son of Joram, began to reign. 22 years old was Ocasias when he began to reign, and he reigned 1 year in Jerusalem. And the name of his mother was Gottoliah, daughter of Ambri, king of Israel. And he walked in the way of the house of Ahab, and did that which was evil in the sight of Yahuwah, as did the house of Ahab. And he went with Joram, the son of Ahab, to war against Azael, king of the Syrians in Ramoth Galad, and the Syrians wounded Joram. And King Joram returned to be healed in Jezreel of the wounds with which they wounded him in Ramoth, when he fought with Azael, king of Syria. And Ochoias, son of Joram, went down to see Joram, the son of Ahab, in Jezreel, because he was sick. Now, when it talks about Azael, That's not the Azael that is sent. That's just another Azael.
No, no, the name's a little different. The one you're thinking of is Azazel. So that would be technically in the English, that would be two Z's there. So you would have Azazel. So it's a little different, the name. Yeah, this is just a king of the Syrians. So I guess the king of the Aramaeans at that point. So this, yeah, the fallen angel you're thinking of is spelled Azazel, or
Oh,
I guess in the original Hebrew it would be Azazal. Yeah, there,
okay.
yeah, yeah.
And then this
That's
guy
confusing.
only reigned 1 year in Jerusalem. His sins must have been really bad.
Yeah, yeah. The Syrians, I guess, were really an issue for Israel at this time. So Ramoth Gilead, that's a popular place here. So this is trying to see. So Gothalia, she was the wicked one that tried to kill all her children, right?
I think
Or
so.
all the boys that were that would have been king. I remember there's one of these wicked Israelite women that they when she became queen, she started killing the king's children. I think that's her, if I'm not mistaken. Gathalia. Yeah.
I think this one is named Athalia, though.
Ah. Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Although that
Yeah. The
is her
Hebrew.
name. They're the same name. Athalia is the name of both of them, not but Athalia.
Hmm.
But yeah, no, you're right. I'm looking at H6271. It says killer of all the members of the royal family of Yehuda, the exception of one baby named Yoash, or Yoash. So unless
Yeah.
this is a different Athalia, they same mother. I guess it depends on how far back Yoash is. It says the daughter of Ahab and Isabel, and the wife of King Jehoram. So I guess not too far back. Probably the same. Um, Although it doesn't really, if his mother's name was Athalia, it doesn't really make sense because she killed all of the children except for Yoash.
Mm-hmm.
So he couldn't. So if she killed all of her children, all of the heirs except for Yoash, as Yoash survived, then it wouldn't make sense for this person's mother to be. Although I guess she could have had more children.
Mm-hmm.
Oh no, wait, no, this is a different Athalia. It says it because the other Athalia was the daughter of Ahab and Isabel. This
Right.
Athalia is the
Okay.
daughter
That
of
makes sense.
Omri.
Yeah. Yeah. I personally think it has to be the same Athalia. It
No,
has to
I'm
be
saying it's a different one because the Athalia
okay.
that killed all of them was the daughter of Ahab and Isabel. This
So,
Athalia, it says Athalia, the daughter of Omri, king of.
I want to bring a point out, if I could. It's interesting to me that so many mothers were involved. Now, I can understand in the case of the two, there was a 7-year-old and an 8-year-old that reigned, but this guy was 22 years old. Why? I don't know. It just seems funny to me why these mothers were so involved.
I don't know, maybe they were worried about conspirators and they felt like they had to watch their son's back.
Mm. It's just interesting because, like, women in Yashrael would not have had any kind of a real forward sort of role. You know what I mean? And I find it interesting that quite a few of them between the time period of the little ones. I'm trying to think of their names. But it's just interesting knowing what we know about Torah and the roles of women. It's interesting to me that they would have been so like sort of forefront in these with these kings.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I could see it from the perspective of they want to look out for their sons.
Yeah, I can see it from that perspective
You
too.
got conspirators always trying to kill the king.
Hmm.
I can definitely see from their point of view why they would want to, kind of look after their sons. Especially sometimes you have like even people of Israel trying to kill the king. So
Yeah, that's true.
like I would assume that Bathsheba was involved when
Oh, I think so.
when Solomon was, having to worry about his own brother. So she would have been
Yeah, she was
involved, probably doing a little reconnaissance, as they call it today, to find out what they were conspiring, what his brother was
Yeah.
conspiring and all that. So, just speculatory, I could see where a woman's role, the mothers of the king,
Yeah.
where
Okay.
it comes
that
about,
makes sense. That makes
you know,
sense. Yeah.
Now
kind of
the other
strategy.
brothers were from the concubines, right?
I forget the guy that tried to kill him. What's his name again? What's the
Well, Absalom tried to kill
No,
him.
no, no, no. I'm talking about the one that tried to kill Solomon. That tried to take his throne.
Yes.
Oh, the brother, Adonijah.
Adonijah. So let me find out
Was he
which
from a
son.
concubine or what was he a full brother?
He was a brother. David's wife Haggith was his mother.
Okay, so that means that she was a concubine.
Yeah, possibly, or
No,
possible
I'm
another
not sure.
another. I know that David had multiple like regular wives,
Yeah, he did. I mean,
so
I think
it could have been
definitely.
just another wife of his that he was the son of.
But Bathsheba is pretty much the only one that is listed as his
Yeah.
wife.
Oh, is that
Yeah,
right? I didn't know that they were all.
yeah,
No, not necessarily. I
No?
think
yeah.
no.
There's
He
yeah.
had multiple wives and multiple concubines.
Yeah, Haggith is his mother, so I would want to look up Haggith.
I think in one chapter he even takes two wives in the same chapter.
Yeah. See, yeah, it says one of the wives of David. Her name means festive. Interesting. Haggith is mentioned in 2 Samuel 3:4, 1 Kings 1-2, 1 Chronicles 3:2. She only appears as the mother of Adonijah, the fourth of David's sons, born according to 2 Samuel 3 in Hebron, while David was fighting Shaul. So it seems like he was one of the older sons of David.
Yeah, he was fourth.
Yeah, so Solomon was like one of the youngest. He was really,
Mhm.
yeah.
He was the oldest son of Bathsheba and David, but they had three other sons.
Yeah, I would assume he would be older than Solomon if he was born to
Oh yeah,
David in Hebron while David was fighting Saul. I would assume.
yeah, definitely.
So, yeah, probably he thought, "Oh, I'm older, like the firstborn.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
kingdom belongs to me. Why is it given to Solomon? Type of thing.
Yeah, but
If
remember Bathsheba went to the king and said, "You promised
Yeah.
me that my
Yeah,
son was going to be the
yeah,
the heir to
Yep.
your
Yep.
throne." So
mm-hmm.
yeah, I think she was like the main wife. Otherwise, the other concubines
Oh, yeah.
could have
You
also
might be right. I mean, you
When
might be
you
right.
have
No,
1 Samuel
yeah, she's a
25, you have Abigail. This is before he even becomes king. It says he married Abigail when Abigail's wife Nabal died.
Mhm.
She went after
Yep.
the servants of Dude and became his wife. And then in verse 43, and Dude took Ahinoam out of Jezreel, and they were both his wives. And then Shaul gave Michal his daughter. Okay, so his other wife, Michal, was taken away. But you have him marrying Abigail and Ahinoam. And the reason why you have Shaul becoming king is
Also,
not because of him necessarily having seniority with him being, but I think that was just favoritism, and also because of what Yahuwah has already spoken.
Yeah,
let me
he's the
see
one that
here.
decided that. Yeah.
How is Saul's daughter spelled again, Mom? Micah or
It's spelled just like Michael, I think.
Mikael?
Michael. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay,
Mikael.
now isn't
It's
it
in the same. It's in
interesting?
the same chapter.
But isn't
Okay.
it interesting that Bathsheba is the one that committed adultery with David
Mhm.
of all the wives that he had that we know of, and yet
Hmm.
still Abba chose her to
Yeah.
have the son that would bring about Yahushua from the
That's
lineage.
right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's because like Yahuwah probably already predestined that Solomon was gonna be like the foreshadowing
Mhm.
of Yahusha. Like it was already Yahuwah
Determined, yeah.
already elected that beforehand. That's why usually when Bathsheba said that to David, she said, you promised me, and I think she even mentions in the promise
Mhm.
that it was also a promise to him by Yahuwah. So in a way, it seems like his lineage of his throne was already predetermined to go through Solomon, not Adonijah, not any of the other sons.
Mhm.
And she does seem to be the favored
Yeah.
wife out
I
of
agree
all
with
of them.
that. Yes. Yes.
She seems to be the one that's almost like a queen almost. She's like,
Mm-hmm.
because it seems like through tradition they believe that she would have stuck around, helped Solomon out when he reigned, and she
Yeah.
would have kind of
Yeah.
took on some type of role
Mm-hmm.
when he took over as king. But yeah, I think mainly it wasn't just like a regular promise Daud gave her. I think it was more like this is a promise Yahuwah gave to him,
That's right.
and that Solomon was going to be, his heir to the throne, and that because when you look at Solomon, his earlier life almost directly correlates
Mm-hmm.
certain things with Yahusha's ministry. You have him riding on a donkey. You have him doing this, doing that. It's almost like a direct parallel, like a direct parallel to Yahusha.
Yeah, and
So
David makes sure take him on my donkey. Now he had lots of horses around,
yeah,
so it's not like they didn't have the horses, but he makes a point to say, right, go to my stable, get my donkey, have him ride on my
Mhm.
donkey. So yeah, David knew that was prophecy, that had to be that way.
yeah. And what's interesting is the first half of his life, Solomon parallels Yahusha. And then the second half of his life, there's little hints paralleling to almost like a type of the beast in a weird way, because he gets into riches and
Yeah.
all this. He gets corrupted by riches. He even starts going into like Ashtoreth worship later on in his life. So it's almost like two stories
Yeah.
of one person. And I think Solomon's early on life is what Yahusha will be, but on a grander scale in the millennium, was kind of the point. Was Yahuwah even giving Solomon peace at first? Was like it was like a foreshadowing. Oh, go ahead, bro. Oh, I think you're muted still.
I would say, in a sense, you could actually say that Solomon's whole life portrays the beast. In the sense that the beast, when he first comes, he's presented as a messenger of light, and then the tables kind of flip. I mean, and granted, I don't believe that Solomon was pretending, the first half of his life, but you can
No.
kind of see that, like, you have the light part, and then all of a sudden it flips, and he um portrayed as, you see the evil.
Yeah, I think his weakness was women. Obviously, his weakness was not just that, but kind of being like a Adam, kind of being like the first Adam, where he let a woman cause him to fall, and where this is why Yahusha and all throughout the Torah mentions why men are supposed to be the head, and this is like
Yeah.
a lesson on the fall, and this is why Yahuwah goes on talking about, listen, when a man makes a vow, no one can nullify his vow, but when a woman, her husband can. And I think that command, in my opinion, it's just opinion here, with disannulling your wife's vow or your daughter's vow, was put in because of the fall. That was literally like a reaction, like Yahuwah wanted to make sure this will never happen again. That Satan will never allow, he'll never allow Satan to get a wife to cause her husband to sin.
Mhm.
And that there's always going to be protection for the wife in place. So that, if she takes a vow and her husband hears it and is like, okay, this is not a smart vow. No, I'm disannulling this. Ain't happening. So, there's little hints here and there. A lot of Solomon's problems was he let his women run him. And possibly early on in his life, I think a lot of his righteousness came from the way he was raised versus maybe his heart. His heart might have been in the right place at first, but I think a lot of what he did was because his dad, told him on his deathbed, listen, you do this, you do that, you do that, you follow Yahuwah, follow your heart. And, it might have not been really from his heart that he was doing it in the first half of his life, just for him to easily fall because of the women that he got involved with, and so easily, persuaded out of so-called love from them. A lot of the movies portray it like, he was in love with these women and they deceived him into doing astral worship. I think he wasn't that innocent. I think a lot of it had to do with, like, he probably was one of the guys that were not founded on a rock, so to say, and he was just doing, worshiping Yahuwah more or less because that's how he was raised, rather than really his whole heart in it. If he had his whole heart in it, possibly he would have fallen to these women. And I mean, it's not like he didn't know not to marry these type of women. It's spoken in scripture, a king's
Yeah.
not to do this, not to do that, not to do that, and he did it anyway.
Mhm.
So it's almost like he wasn't really worshiping Yahuwah with his heart. It was more of a head knowledge. I'm supposed to do this, I'm supposed to do that, which a lot of us are guilty of.
You think
We're
that if that were the case, though, do you think that Yahweh would have baruched him in the way that he baruched him?
Yeah, I think Yahuwah put up a lot with Solomon because of the promise he made to Daud.
Mhm.
I think a lot of it to do with his dad. A lot of it, just like Yahuwah put up with Israel as a whole because of the promise he made to Abraham. I think a lot of it had to do with the ancestors and the ancestors being so obedient that, like, Yahuwah kind of for a while turned a blind eye to a lot of what Solomon was doing until he couldn't anymore and had to, Yahuwah being a righteous judge having to do something. I think he was giving more mercy to Solomon than he would give probably to any other individual, like, because of the promise he made to Daud. And I think Yahuwah there's even evidence of this all throughout scripture that Yahuwah will sometimes give more mercy. In our eyes, we think it's unfair, but Yahuwah has elect. He has elect people. He gives his elect more chances than he would the world. And we see that, and it's not like it's unfair. It's not like it's favoritism. It's just that the fathers were obedient to Yahuwah, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and those are his people. And so, he sometimes, from us looking from the outside in, we would think it's unfair or showing favoritism, but Yahuwah says, I have mercy on whom I want to have mercy. And we have no right to judge, Yahuwah for having mercy on one individual, way more mercy on one person than, the world, someone out in the world where, he obviously is not given the same amount of mercy to. So I think that's where the confusion comes with that. And like Solomon, I think was given way more mercy than probably any of us would ever be given, because Yahuwah had a plan. Yahuwah had a promise to his father, and Yahuwah was going to allow him to do what he did because Yahuwah had a bigger purpose for the lineage of Daud. He had a bigger purpose. I mean, even before Daud comes into the picture, you have Judah, the person Judah, and being extremely wicked, and Yahuwah putting up with him just so that there's a seed for Messiah to come in. I really think that's where it boils down to, because Judah, you compare the two houses, Judah was no more righteous than Israel
Right.
with the divorce.
That's right.
No more righteous at all. So he did not divorce Judah because they were righteous. He stayed married to them only for one reason, I
That's
believe,
right. I do
is for
too.
Yahusha to have a house to come in through,
Mhm.
for him to
Yep.
have that lineage that was already prophesied, promised by Yahuwah, that he would specifically go through the loins of Judah. So if Yahuwah divorces Judah, you can't have that happen. So there's times where we think it's unfair, and we see Yahuwah giving more mercy to someone else than another person.
He has his
But
reasons.
it's just the what I chalk it up to. It's sovereignty. Yahuwah is sovereign. He's going to give someone he's going to give mercy to those whoever he wants to give to, and
That's right.
But anyway, that's the best answer I could give for that, is that he picks and chooses who he has mercy on.
Mhm.
And so that's the best way I could describe that, is that even though none of us deserve it, he will choose who he wants to give mercy to.
That's right.
So anyway, Sister Marissa, do you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, in comparison to Solomon and Samson, it's kind of like the same, right? I mean, Samson had all these women,
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
and he had a lot of favor with Allah too until he cut his hair. But even after he cut his hair and they plucked his eyes out, the father showed mercy to him in allowing him to do what he allowed him to do. So the story of Solomon reminds me of Samson also.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's interesting that Samson is mentioned, even after all he did, he's listed in Hebrews 11 among the people that had Mona. It's really interesting.
Mhm. Yeah.
With concubines, though, a concubine is not in covenant, correct?
No,
There's not
actually, the only difference with a concubine is that they're a lesser status wife. From what I've seen in scripture, how it's used is for wives that are kind of like not on the same level as the main wife. Like like let's say, right, Abraham was to marry Hagar, hypothetically speaking. Hagar would be under Sarah. She would not be equal. She would be a lesser wife.
But he did marry her.
Oh, okay, he did. I wasn't too sure. That's why I said hypothetically.
Yeah,
I
because
wasn't
it
too
said that
sure.
Sarah gave Hagar to be his wife.
Okay, so yeah, that's a perfect
Oh,
example
okay.
then.
Right.
So she was Sarah's mistress, right? She was Sarah's servant, handmaid,
Mhm.
given as a wife to Abraham. She would have been like a concubine. She would have been a lesser status wife. Hagar has to answer to Sarah. See, this is where people don't understand polygamy today. But that's a whole nother topic. How biblical polygamy works is that you have the main wife, who's really the wife, and then you have the concubines, who are like lesser wives, not equal, and they ultimately answer actually to the main wife. They don't answer to the husband. So the way the world has it today, it's backwards. It's not like, they're sex slaves or whatever. That's not what a concubine is. A concubine's a lesser wife. So they would still be in covenant, but they wouldn't be equal to the regular wife. So, like, I don't think we can use Judah as a concubine, because Judah and Israel at one point were one wife, and then they were split. So they became split because of the wickedness of Solomon, actually. So it basically was one solid sole wife of Yahuwah. Then they became sisters, and he had two wives due to the split. But that, I don't think Yahuwah ever references them as a concubine. I don't think ever does that. So I would say they're equal to Israel as far as status goes. But I really think the only difference with why they weren't divorced, or why it never mentions them being divorced, is Yehuda needed tribe of Judah to go through. There's no other way. He needed it. So it wasn't like they were better than Israel. It was like necessity, according to prophecy. There was a necessity there. And sometimes Yahuwah, for his bigger will, will do things that we in our limited capacity as humans don't understand sometimes, because we're looking at it as, according to the letter of the law,
Right.
and forgetting the spirit of the law, and forgetting that what is the bigger issue here? If Yahuwah divorces Judah too, where's the Messiah going to come through?
That's right.
If he gets rid of Judah here, because if he does divorce Judah back then, there is no New Testament. There is no new covenant. There is no way for Messiah to come through, because that's the remnant of that Shemite lineage he has to come through.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have the northern house as an option. You only have the southern house. Go ahead, brother.
Looking at like the difference between polyamory and polygamy and polygyny, and apparently polygamy is just multiple partners, so it can actually extend to a woman with multiple husbands. However, polygyny is always indicated by a man with multiple wives. So it would actually be polygyny.
Yeah.
Polygamy can be polygyny. It can be a man with multiple wives, but it can also be a wife with multiple.
Yeah, then to be completely accurate, I would be talking about polygyny then. My bad. So that would be the biblical concept, is polygyny. But where we sometimes get it wrong is we think the husband is running everything. He's not really, because that concubine is not answering to him, is answering to the wife. So, hence why Sarah said what she said, and why Yahuwah said, listen to your wife.
Mm-hmm.
He said, I want Hagar gone, and Abram had no control over it. He's like, all right, I really, you forced me into this situation. All right, now, okay, you're telling me you want her gone, So he goes to Yahuwah, and Yahuwah says, do what your wife says. So in that aspect of polygyny, the wife's actually in control. So anyone that's operating in polygyny outside of that, what we see in scripture, is unbiblical.
So, Brother Joshua, in the Gospels, when Yahushua said to the woman at the well that she had 7 husbands, is that what you're referring to about polygamy?
No, this is having multiple husbands at the same time.
At the
That
same
woman-
time.
But
Yeah,
didn't he say to her, you're right,
she just was an adulteress. She married 7 husbands. She
right.
Not at the same
Yeah.
time though.
Yeah,
She
not
said
at the
this
same
is-
time.
You have had 7 husbands and
Yeah.
now you have none.
Yeah.
Yeah, so no, it was basically like what Herod did with his brother's wife, is what she was doing. She was committing adultery over and over and over and over again. So that's why Yahusha said, the man you live with now is not even your husband. So, she had 7 husbands, had present tense. She had 7 husbands at one point, meaning, probably individually she had 7 husbands. She kept remarrying without a bill of divorcement. Basically, if you remarry without a bill of divorcement, you're an adulteress or adulterer. you can say that you consider yourself only married to your new husband or wife, but if you are legally, according to scripture, still married without that bill of divorcement, you're committing adultery over and over and over again. And that's probably what Yahushua was referring to the Samaritan woman. Like, yeah, you've had 7 husbands, and the one you're with now is not even your husband. So she was committing adultery so much that she didn't even bother marrying the guy that she was living with. So she kept having multiple husbands, one husband after the next. And then the man she's with, she was probably just fornicating with. That's probably what happened. And that's what Yahushua was saying. So yeah, it's a little different from polygyny. Polygyny would be, which scripturally speaking, there's no such thing as a woman with multiple husbands. That never happens. As far as I've seen in scripture, that never happens to actually have multiple husbands at once. It seems to only be the husband with the multiple wives. Usually they're not all equal. You have the main wife and you have concubines, or you'll and Jacob, even with his situation, there had to be a Torah command added because
Because of that,
he
yeah.
married one sister, and then Laban had to give him the other sister because that's the one he wanted. And so then you had these 2 sisters that are both his wives, bickering at one another. And Yahuwah, later on says, you know what? No more. We're
That's it.
not going to have a sister marry another sister's husband, because, there's the jealousy there. There's going to be jealousy there. So, but anyway, just to explain, yeah, the polygyny is the more biblical term, I would say, because polygyny is only man, and that's all you see in scripture. You see a man with multiple wives. You never see the vice versa. You really rarely ever see that. I don't think I've ever seen it in scripture where the woman had multiple husbands, as far as I know.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, the world has created that because they created equality out of nowhere. That's where they create that. They probably why the world's polygamy is different from polygyny is because they don't believe in biblical headship, number one. So they think everyone's equal. So that means a woman can have, multiple husbands just like a guy has multiple wives. So they think there has to be equality everywhere.
Yeah, that's right.
So that's probably where that comes from, I would assume. Is
I'm look on Wikipedia. The reason it's skipping is saying polyandry, which would be the other form of polygamy. The polygamy that's the woman with multiple husbands. Polyandry is believed to be more likely in societies with scarce environmental resources. It is believed to limit human population growth and enhance child survival. It's a rare form of marriage that exists not only among peasant families, but also among elite families. For example, polyandry in the Himalayan mountains is related to the scarcity of land. The marriage of all the brothers in a family to the same wife allows family land to remain intact and undivided. If every brother married separately and had children, family land would be split into unsustainable small plots. So it seems more like greed and trying to keep everything within the family.
yeah,
Not necessarily quality.
yeah. Yeah, that's a whole nother topic for a whole nother day, though, about biblical polygyny and why it gets so misconstrued and why people think it's sin. A lot of it has to do with fleshy reasons and just not really, the reasons for them doing it most of the time in this modern generation. People don't do it for righteous reasons. They do it for sinful reasons. They're not doing it for the right reasons. It should be, if anything, it should be to have a stronger family unit. It should be, if anything, when you see in scripture it being used, it's used either to build up the seed of Yasharel for Yahuwah's promise, number one, or number two, the idea is to be used to have a stronger family for Yasharel to have help sometimes the wife needs help when there's so many children. Okay, there's actually righteous reasons to have it.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, the devil has, twisted it into, I guess, so polygyny would be the original biblical concept, and then polygamy would be what the world thinks it is. But anyway, so the world doesn't even know what a real concubine is, because I
Yeah.
remember even in shows, they would say, "Oh, you bloody concubine," this show Frasier and all that.
Negative connotations.
Not even understanding, only from a Christian perspective. They think you're a slave or whatever if you're a concubine. That's not what a
Yeah.
concubine is. So it's a huge misunderstanding
Mhm.
in today's world. So anyway, hopefully that was edifying for you guys that were listening in. Hopefully that was for someone out there. But I think we're about to end it for today. I hope you guys have a great rest of your Shabbat. All of our brothers and sisters in Yahuwah and Yahusha out there, have a great rest of your Shabbat in Yahuwah, in Yahusha. I hope this was edifying to you guys, and Yahuwah willing, Yahusha willing, see you guys next time. Shalom. Shabbat shalom.